If you've experienced spiritual harm or spiritual abuse, some people may or may not identify it as abuse, but if the outcome is that you have spiritual trauma, it is likely that you are also experiencing a realm of emotions that you have been hurt in numerous ways, and you may be in a place where you are seriously questioning who God is, if he's even good or loving, and what to do with that. My name is Jolene Underwood. I am a trauma and abuse informed therapist and a growth coach. I operate a community called Cultivate Together, where we are focused on developing who we are and how we show up in this world in ways that help people really identify what's going on inside of them so that they can make choices and develop how they want to show up in the world. This is not about me telling you what to do or how to fix things. That is my approach in general as a counselor and a coach, because I want to help you facilitate a path to growth and healing. And if you've experienced spiritual trauma in some way, if you have a lasting imprint that has been pain in your soul, or maybe you've worked through a lot of it already, maybe you're in the depths of it right now, but there is something so hurt inside of you because of how others use their position, their presence, their it's like some position of authority over you to try to tell you things that were damaging about God and how you relate to him. They may have minimized anytime you felt an emotion that wasn't in line with what they thought should be the appropriate emotion for you and God. They may have told you that you are not obeying God if you don't do X, Y, and Z, and thereby you're going to miss out on all these things from God. Like they twist some things and make the whole experience about what they actually think should happen. So, trauma affects who we are and how we show up in the world. Spiritual trauma really affects how we see God and his interactions in the world. I work with a lot of clients who, a high percentage of them do have some inkling, whether it's like super tiny or bigger, they have some idea that there's probably a God that is better than what they've been told or what they've been taught or how they've come to understand God. And some part of them holds on to that. They do value someone who believes in God, but especially someone who is not going to tell them all the things that they must do and try to get them to conform to one man's perspective of how God operates. So I work with a lot of people who need that space to work through the confusion, the doubt, and who don't really know what to do with their thoughts and feelings. And they have over and over and over again found that when they started to feel anything that seemed negative in the sense of like anger, fear, sadness, that they were immediately either shut down, dismissed, denied, or somebody tried to tell them a verse that they need to hold on to. They told them that they needed to do certain things. So we have the spiritual harm that can also happen from people who maybe mean well, maybe they're not necessarily abusive, but they are continually discounting and dismissing out of their own discomfort or whatever. They're just not really safe people. Then you have a higher extreme where it becomes much more dangerous. And you think of like the recent video, Prime Video, Shiny Happy People, IBLP, and Bill Gothard and his impact, and so many others who have been damaging. Their teachings have damaged people's souls. They have led people to believe certain things that actually kept them from experiencing the love of God, kept them from experiencing God's acceptance and value for who they are. Because if they didn't wear such and such or dress a certain way, then they were rebelling against God and they were a problem. So there's a lot of different examples of what spiritual harm and spiritual abuse can look like. What I want to highlight is things I want you to know about healing and recovery from spiritual trauma. And when I say what I want you to know, I'm thinking about me as a trauma and abuse informed therapist and a growth coach, as someone who has seen a lot of it and heard a lot of different stories, who has also been in a church situation where it was so confusing and foggy, and I didn't realize till later, whoa, this was actually really damaging. It was not okay. Um, so from that perspective, sharing with you as either someone who has directly experienced spiritual harm, spiritual abuse, in some way has spiritual trauma for themselves, or if you are walking with or seeing with another person specifically, or seeing this with other people, and you want to care for them well. These key ideas that are highlighted in the 2 articles that I wrote for Crosswalk, 10 things to know about recovery from spiritual trauma and 10 steps to healing from spiritual trauma. I want to highlight these concepts for you because I think they can be helpful for the person who needs healing and for the person who's walking with others who are healing. Because there is a big gap in our ability as the community of believers to come around someone who has been so wounded that they aren't able to take that little seed, that little bit, that little glimmer that's left of maybe there's a God that's better than what I've been told. Maybe there's some things to know about God deep in my heart differently than I've known before. That little glimmer, that bit that's there, we try to take over, and we're not cultivating anything in that sense. We are stealing and robbing God's work in their heart to bring that seed into a life of fullness and thriving. We try to take over and manage it. So instead of doing that, instead of adding to the harm that they've already experienced, we as the church body can learn to be connected to what's going on inside of ourselves when we're dealing with somebody who's suffering from spiritual harm, spiritual abuse. And we can also learn some valuable ways that make room for God to work in a whole new way, to where they can actually experience God's love deep in the core of their being and live from that and move into a place of freedom. So, first, I'm going to highlight the article on 10 things to know about recovery from spiritual trauma. First, I kind of highlighted what spiritual trauma includes. Like, there may be a sense of hypervigilance around other people who call themselves Christians. So, for example, when I'm getting different clients, or somebody's considering like sending me out as a referral, they're talking to somebody who's skittish about, they kind of want a Christian counselor because they want someone who gets that element of their life, but they're very hesitant because people who have been in some level above them in a sense, a position where they had authority in some way, or they're just like, it's a power differential. That's really a better word. The power dynamic is a differential there. They've used that power in a problematic ways, in harmful ways. And a Christian counselor, sometimes there are Christian counselors too that have been very damaging for other people, sad to say. Just like we can do that in the communities, Christian counselors can do that too. So people will want to know, they might be really skeptical if they hear the word Christian. What do I do with that? I'm not offended by it. If somebody I'm going to be true to who I am. I am a Christian. And in my therapy work, I maybe bring in Christian concepts and maybe some prayer or whatever, if that client wants it, always at the pace of where the client is at. It is not my job to tell them what to do. That doesn't even help. Doesn't actually help them experience the life that God wants for them. So, there may be the hypervigilance and like this high sense of nobody's safe. Nobody's good. Like, we start to split good and bad. We start thinking that anything to do with Christianity is problematic. And more we do that, the farther away we get from being able to receive God's love for us. But it's important to know that sense of safety within themselves has been completely jacked up. It is hijacked because they wanted to believe good things. They wanted to do good things, or if that's you, you wanted to do good things. You wanted to believe that this was helpful for you, that you could honor God and other people this way. And in the end, that wasn't honoring. In some cases, It's downright evil. So it makes sense. It makes sense that the nervous system is on high alert to fight, to fear, to flee away, to freeze, all those different things that happen with our nervous systems. It makes sense that they happen. Okay. We don't want it to stay that way because that is not God's design for any of us to live in a place of high alert. It affects our whole physiology, that extra cortisol that damages things in our body. And I mean, after the recovery from the ranch and all that we experienced there, my body went into like kind of shut down, and the cortisol just high gear had effects on my body. So we don't want to stay there. That's not God's design for us. And we want to be able to experience more things that calm our nervous system, help us experience healing in our brain and our body so that we can have new experiences. Okay. So I just want to highlight that spiritual harm. It just weaves into every area of our lives. We have that high sense of safety that's kind of off kilter. I talk to people about resetting their safety signals, identifying when they're actually experiencing a sense of not being safe with another person, not because that other person has shown themselves to be unsafe, but because that person had there was a slight cue in their tone of voice, or because of a word that they use, or because of the position that they hold, or a facial expression or something like that reminded their body, without even knowing it, the person who's suffering from trauma, when it reminds their body of the past person, everything gets kind of put into high gear, right? Okay, so the first thing I put in the recovering article is your experience is your experience. Only you, as the person who's dealt with spiritual harm, can identify what that experience is. So in the steps to healing, that is the first one that's there. Name your experience. You may not be able to put many words to it up front. That is okay. That is a trauma response. There is a challenge with our ability to access word choices and express verbally when we have had high trauma in our bodies. And so whatever helps you start to describe what your experience was, how you experienced it, you might have to step back and you might need to draw things. You might need to just kind of identify something that portrays that experience in a way, and it can start to bring some words out. You might have some fractured words, and somebody else, especially a trauma and abuse informed therapist, maybe can help fill out the words so that you can reconnect to the way that your words are used to name your experience, so that you can identify what your experience is. Other people have harmed you if you've been through spiritual trauma, or the person that you've loved. It causes what ends up happening in that realm is discounting what your experience is, trying to tell you that's not your real experience, or trying to say that you shouldn't be experiencing that because you should remember that you're victorious in Christ, or you should do this and that. It is your experience. It's not always going to stay that way. It doesn't have to mean the end of the world, the whatever. It means we're just noticing. Step back. Notice what your experience is. Observe it. Draw it. Talk out some concepts with like just the words that do come out in bits and pieces. Just notice what those are so that you can start to name your experience. That is taking that initial awareness and taking ownership for yourself. It is my experience. Nobody else can tell you what it is. And nobody can tell you that it isn't. Like, if you have anger, when people try to tell you you shouldn't have anger, well, that isn't helpful. It isn't what you're experiencing right now. When we first have to notice what our experience was in the situation that caused the harm, what our experience is today, so that we can have new experiences in the future. Okay. So, second thing about recovery from spiritual trauma, spiritual harm: questions, doubt, uncertainty, and confusion are normal. It just is. It messes with your mind. And all those experiences that you've had that caused the trauma in the first place will bring about, when you start to have different thoughts, or you try to oppose the damaging beliefs and expectations, etc., judgments that were placed on you, when you start to oppose that, it's going to bring confusion, and you're kind of restructuring in your mind what you believe and how you're going to live out what you believe. It's going to be confusing. I don't know what that is. People told me this and people told me that. And along the way, in the healing process, you're moving from what everybody else said to what, how you are going to either receive what, um, like they said something and you're like, well, actually, that's not true. So I'm choosing not to receive it. Like that's kind of down the road in the healing process. It takes a while for the brain to get there. Right now, we're just noticing that questions, doubt, uncertainty, and confusion are normal responses. If you are sitting with somebody who was harmed, spiritual trauma, they have a response that is full of different emotions, confusion, doubt, and uncertainty. We do not need to feel threatened. And our tendency is to react from a threatened place when somebody expresses doubt that they don't believe God anymore. They don't trust God. They don't know that He's good. They don't know that He loves them. Their experiences have kept them from being able to have that with God. So you can be, if you're the person helping somebody, another person, you can be a presence that God is just working through to help them feel loved and accepted while they're wrestling, to give them that space. In the healing article, I talk about finding others who can create space for your story. You need to have space for your story for yourself, and then you need to find other people. I don't want to say you need to and this should have to, but it is beneficial for us when we do find other people, because that's how God works. Like we have these relational ways in our brain, even is this design to shift things inside of us when we have this experience of somebody being present with us in the difficult emotions, in the challenge as we're wrestling through things. So there's powerful things that happen for us when we're doing it on our own, when we get to release all the emotion to the extent that we need to, like sobbing and weeping and wailing, for example. And then there's also a different positive exchange that occurs in our brain, our body, when we're able to do that with safe people who create space for that. And we, as a helper of another person who's experienced trauma, can be that person. We can wrestle with our own discomfort so that we can notice, okay, this is a normal part of the process. We can ask them questions. What does it mean to you that this happened? What would you like to be true? Start to learn what some of those questions are. I'm not going to dive into that today. So on the recovery article, I talked about God being who God is, not man's distorted interpretations. So somebody asked me several years ago, what would you say to somebody whose daughter was really sick, and their child got sick, and their child died? Or no, let me, it's a different example. The child was harmed by their dad. They were abused by their dad. Happens way too often. I hear lots of stories of sexual, emotional, psychological, physical abuse when your child by a father, or a father figure in someone's life. So what happens then? And they can't see that God is, like God's not a good father. Well, they haven't experienced a good father. Of course, they don't feel like God is a good father. That has not been their experience. I have also heard multiple times from people, and watch this happen, experiencing God as a loving father figure as He's actually designed to be, not this distorted version that man put upon them, that man distorted. Because that man, sometimes in these situations, especially when there's a spiritual element, is trying to say, you have to do this because God says. Whoa, that does a number on our hearts and minds. So I highlight this because there's so much confusion, and it's hard to know, who is God really? Will the real God show up? Over time, I believe He will. I believe He will. And it'll be way different than what you had when you were being harmed. Okay. So space for yourself to have honest connection to your story, others who provide space for your story. And then I talk about in the recovery article and in the steps to healing that it just takes time to reorient and recalibrate yourself. Time to explore those questions. Who is God really? How will God show up in my life in a way that's different than what all this stuff that's tied to fear. Now I'm afraid of God because if I don't do X, Y, and Z, he's going to do X, Y, and Z, and that's terrifying. Who is God really? People talk about, like I talk about, experiencing God's love, and I don't know what that feels like. It takes time to feel that, to notice it, to receive it, to experience it in community, to find places where you can experience it. And earlier I talked about the safety signals. They get really off kilter. So you have a safety alarm that's going ding, 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 because somebody made a facial expression or they had a tone of voice that reminded you of this person who used their position and power over you to treat you like you didn't matter. It takes time for those safety signals to recalibrate, for your nervous system to recalibrate, and for the spiritual connection, like who you are in your soul, to recalibrate to the beautiful good design that God actually has for you, where you can experience his love, where you can live from that place and live a life of freedom. And then healing, this happens in layers. One of the things I talked about in healing and some of the layers that are involved in the healing process is you're kind of identifying what your experience is. What do you believe? What are you confused about? What are those elements? You're also going to maybe notice some things that you need to grieve. Multiple layers of grief. There's often also complicated or complex grief, compounded grief, layers of grief. And that can be because you lost your whole community. Maybe you lost additional friendships because you stood up to the person who was being destructive in your life. You stood up against it, and now people don't understand because you're not submitting well enough, because you're not kind enough, because suddenly you decided, wait a minute, that's not acceptable. This is not okay to be treated this way. You're gonna have a loss. Sadly, a lot of people experience a loss in maybe their whole church. Sometimes the church will side with a spouse, for example, who's abusive, who has been controlling and manipulating and using God's word or their position that they're just as a husband and saying that because I am a husband, I get to do this because God says this, distorts so much. You're going to be grieving the people that you've lost, the relationships that you lost. You might grieve the time you lost. Time lost to acquiescing to other people's beliefs, acquiescing to the power of believing for yourself that this is what you should be doing. And then you realize that doesn't actually work. It's not actually giving me the outcome I wanted. There's going to be grief tied to the time. Sometimes people get really stuck there. And so it's important to grieve what is lost, layer by layer, lots of layers. When they come up, just notice them when they come up. If it, there's different ways to process emotions. So I'm not going to cover that right now. It's also can be really helpful to celebrate what is good. A lot of times, even when I hear these stories, it's interesting, especially with the work of EMDR that I do, because EMDR has a way of helping the brain work through the really painful stuff that gets that processing and move into something that's adaptive and positive and beautiful to experience. And so sometimes I will see people notice, wow, out of this, I thought this was an all bad experience. There's actually some good that happened then, or good that happened as a result of it. And I'm not saying that good trumps the bad, discounts the bad. We are not going to say that. We're going to hold space for both. That is an important piece of integrating healthy spirituality, healthy emotional health. That doesn't even make sense. But by celebrating what is good, that's kind of like our fight against what has been bad, to say, God has also shown me good things along the way, or I'm starting to see good things in myself. I'm starting to see good things in just who I am. I even think, start to realize and own I am worthy of being loved simply because God created me, because I'm a human being. I'm going to celebrate that that's a good thing. My clients know, and the people in the Cultivate Together community know, I love to celebrate with them. Little wins, big wins, it doesn't matter. Little things that we can celebrate, right? And I do this online because it's like sign language for celebration and it's visual in the screen, especially on Zoom. Like, yes, yes. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited for you. I love when you see that you actually did have insight about that. You were told not to trust your insight. You were told not to trust what was happening, but you did notice something. And now you're learning that it's okay to have those thoughts. It's okay to explore that and to test the waters and things. I celebrate that. I celebrate that with you. Okay. In the recovery article, sorry, I have an overactive tear duct here. Probably appropriate for this too. um, one thing I wanted to notice is that God feels with you. In spiritually abusive situations, so often there will be, and even in non-spiritually abusive situations, what we do as a Christian community is deny, dismiss, discount, minimize, and blame and shame other people. And when it happens repeatedly and in certain patterns, then it's completely destructive. But so there's just ways that we can do this without even realizing it. And maybe it's not like a huge problem, but it happens a lot. It happens a lot in Christian communities. For example, if somebody told you, you just need to pick up your cross. You need to pick up your cross. Okay, so you've been harmed. Well, you're just going to have to deal with that. There's like a truth in there. There's a truth in that we are responsible for our things that are for us. I'm not getting that out very well, but there's a video on soul stewardship and self-stewardship that you can watch about this concept that yes, these are things that we own and we kind of want to identify what we are responsible for. That is very different. That is a perspective of kind of noticing and stewarding what is ours versus this premise when people say something like, you just need to stop playing the victim, pick up your cross. They're completely discounting the pain, and it's actually the wrong cross. Sometimes they want you to pick up the cross of staying in a situation that's actually damaging, and God doesn't want you to do that. He does not want us to keep he says, don't put your pearls before swine. We do not need to keep putting the best of ourselves before people who stomp on it and harm us. So if somebody says, you have to pick up your cross. I'm sorry. The harm that you've received, that is your responsibility. Only you can and get to manage that, attend to it, heal. And it stinks. It downright sucks sometimes that we have to do that. But we need people who can actually hear the story and just understand so that we can make that choice to do that. So I want you to know, and you can believe me or not, but I want to share this with you because I believe it's a beautiful thing that God feels with you. He gets angry at oppression, at people who oppress you and distort who he is, and angry at people who keep you from experiencing the goodness of God. God feels that with you. He is sad and he is angry with us when people harm us. It is not okay. So in the recovery article, let's move down a little bit more. You get to choose how to move forward. You get to decide what is helpful. Yeah, these are choices you make. You've been in a position like it's most likely with spiritual trauma that you probably had people tell you what they think you need to do, you must do, you should do. And that's why I try to reiterate, like I'm trying to provide some things that you can do that I believe are helpful. At the end of the day, you get to decide. Do I want that? Am I ready to move forward? I may not be ready, but I'm going to choose to move into it because I know it's a little bit discomfort. I want to see healing and freedom on the other side. You get to decide. You get to decide what kind of help is helpful for each stage of your new season. And along the way, as you're healing and growing, you're probably going to make some mistakes. Your nervous system might be wired to go, oh my gosh, I made a mistake. Oh my gosh, what do I do now? They're going to hate me and God's going to think this and now I'm not going to be blessed in this way, or I'm going to have a consequence. Like all these things that happen because of the spiritual harm that's happened to your soul. Mistakes are not the end. In fact, sometimes mistakes we make help us experience God's love in our place of being imperfect. And when we have those experiences, it can really strengthen the core of who we are. so that we can show up in the world as a free, vibrant human being. Okay. So let me wrap up with something else that is normal. Trauma responses are normal. We don't want them to stay that way, but you may feel trapped. You may feel hopeless. You may feel helpless. You may feel super angry and retaliatory. These are normal responses. But the healing process, that naming your experience, starting with that awareness and moving into healing with another person. And if you can find a great Christian counselor or a counselor who understands trauma and abuse, who can provide space for you for your story and help you experience healing in your mind, spirit, and overall body, your whole nervous system. There's things that happen um, that are normal, so we don't need to feel shame over it. We just want to notice that when it's not healthy or helpful so that we can move into a place that is for ourselves and for other people. Last things is this message of there's grace for growth after stress and trauma. I did another video. I think it's exactly called that. There's grace for growth after stress and trauma that you may be interested in, because I want to keep sharing this message of encouragement and hope that there's grace for you. There is grace for your loved one who's been harmed. The growth process is a process, layer by layer, step forward, step back, changes, whirlwinds, ebbs and flows of emotions, losses, shifts in relationships and personal connections. There's a lot that's involved. And I pray and hope that you will have grace for yourself in your own journey, and that you will find people who are safe to help you explore healing and growth for the future. I hope this video has been helpful. And if so, please do hit the like button, share it with somebody who you think would be helpful for. It really helps other people see this video. If you think it's helpful, I'd love to be able for people, someone else who might find it helpful to find it. So you can like it, subscribe, get the notifications if you want to be notified when I have new content on the channel. This is for YouTube. Elsewhere, just liking and commenting helps me know that you appreciate the content and also helps other people to see it. At the end of the day, I'm just holding space for you in my heart and mind for the pain that you've endured. And I'm so sorry for the ways that you've experienced dismissal and denial of your experience, that it has been invalidated that you actually experienced what you did. I am praying now, God, that you would bring people into a person's life who needs healing and growth, who wants it, people who are safe enough to begin that journey and to continue on it. I pray for courage and this process of connection that helps you develop who you are and how you live. Take care.